Peter's already outlined some of the origins of my interest. Now, we moved here 20 years ago, so that was 2003, or 22 years ago now, 2003, and I was well underway with writing the history because there was a big celebration of 100 years of SDN, what is today SDN Children's Services, and you know that SDN Piedmont shares the building with the Piedmont Community Centre. At about the same time, but a little bit earlier, the Kindergarten Union was founded. Maybanke was one of the principal founders of the Kindergarten Union. They started the first free kindergarten in Woolloomooloo, just as the first day nursery was established in Woolloomooloo. So it was inevitable when you were researching the history of that time, that activity in that place, that you kept finding out about Maybanke. So these were set up by fairly well-off women who realised that the women that came in every day to cook and clean and do the laundry had nowhere to leave their children. They either locked them in the house or locked them outside on the street. So it was a vital service which was run by philanthropy because for some years there was no government assistance. So I became, I found this little book, Maybanke Anderson. That's the title of the talk today. It's an excellent little book, but it was written 25 years ago, but I've drawn on it heavily for this talk today. And the author was really outraged that she hadn't heard of this woman before. She said, "I was astonished that a life so rich in its contribution to Australia's social history should have been ignored. I studied history as my major at university. I taught history. I've been involved in the feminist movement. Why am I continually surprised that women are invisible?" The first time she ever heard of Maybanke was in a book published in 1988 called 200 Unsung Heroes and Heroines. And if you look in Google, there's not a lot there. Now, Wendy McCarthy, who was a guru among feminists, wrote that she didn't know that the kindergarten in the rocks where her children went, the Lance Kindergarten, was a creation of Maybanke Anderson. Nor did I know how important her contribution was to the suffrage movement. So I'll talk about both of those things later. In a speech to the Women's Suffrage League in 1891, Maybanke said, "Our daughters and granddaughters who stand in the dawn of the 20th century, the women's century, will say, these women did not have our education. They had few of our advantages, few of our privileges. They tottered on the narrow path which has merged into the broad path on which we walk so freely." Now, I don't know whether the 20th century turned out to be the women's century. I don't know whether the 21st century is the women's century. But, and do we walk on a broad path now? I leave you to think about that. But only a few years, a matter of 2 or 3 years after her death, a professor of history wrote, "The process of history has rendered her invisible." So I wanted to bring her out of that invisibility tonight. So I will now go to the start of the story. That was, her first name was Maybanke Susanna Self. She was born in Surrey, in England, in 1845. Her birth name was Self. Now, Maybanke's an odd name, And strangely enough, it was the name of a male, the surname of a male ancestor. But it seems to be one of those names that got passed down, and for some reason they gave her that name. But she was always called May. Her father was a plumber. You might assume that the family was working class, but she later wrote, "I come from that great middle class whose men have sailed in every sea, blah, blah, blah," and so on. But it's because they valued education that they were middle class. And I've got that photo up because I think it's interesting. That's her grandmother and Maybanke when she was 8 years old. But each of them is holding a book. And it's a bit like those old portraits of aristocrats that had a dog or a rifle or a sword or whatever. It's saying this is important to us. Learning, education. All her life she believed passionately in the value of education. She had 2 brothers, Norman and Henry, and her grandmother, she said, was a bit frightening. She said, "Speak up and hold your ground." And her mother said, "You've got to be able to support yourself financially. As a woman, you've got to, and become a teacher, because that way you'll be able to support yourself." And she was going to need this advice as time went on. So the reason they came to Sydney, why they emigrated, was hard times in England in the 1840s and 1850s. Caroline Chisholm was over there, and she was publishing all these testimonials from people who'd emigrated to Australia and said how wonderful it was out here. And there may have been a medical reason, which I'll talk about later, but anyway, they all got onto a ship called the steamship Bangalow, which happens to be where my son and his family live. And it was the name of a poem. I don't know anything more about that, but they landed in, when did they arrive? 1855, that's right. And they moved to the Rocks, and they moved into a house that was owned by Mary Reeby, who was the convict, very successful businesswoman. But it was very slummy, you know, it was the sort of a lot of poverty in the Rocks. So she was well aware of how the poor lived. And her dad, he wasn't a very good businessman. He left the family back in Sydney because the boys were studying to be engineers. And he went up and farmed in Warragamba, and he drowned in an appeal in 1867 when Maybanke would have been 22. So one brother Norman became a noted engineer. He was the chief engineer at Mort's Stock in Balmain, and he invented the first ice-making machine, and a machine called the velocipede, which I'll show you a photo of. Oh, you got it up there. Is that there? No, okay. Okay, it's the next one. We'll show you a photo of that in a minute. The suburb of Normanhurst is named after him. So, some years after her death, a letter written to a newspaper described Maybanke at the age of 17, and the writer at the time had been 19 years of age. She seemed to me at the age of my impressionability simply grand, stately as a queen and gracious to a degree. One feature was her voice, bordering on the masculine, but so modulated and sweet that once you heard it, you could never forget it. That seems very over the top, but certainly every speech that's been written up of hers, everything she wrote shows what a way she had with words. Almost everything she wrote, you thought, oh gee, I wish I could remember that. It's just so plain, straightforward, lacking in hypocrisy, honest, clear. That's why she had such influence, because she'd write letters to the papers and everyone could see what she was talking about. So, right, so the next one. She got married in 1867, and she might have been pregnant when she got married. She married Edmund Wollstonecraft, who was a timber merchant from Maitland. And they moved up to Maitland and stayed there only a couple of years. But over the next 11 years, she had 7 children, and only 3 of them survived. Her 3 sons, 2 little boys and 2 little girls died before the age of 5. And it seems that there was a family susceptibility to TB, and tuberculosis was rife at that time. So she seemed to be happy in Maitland. That's Edmund with Maybanke's brother on the velocipede, and Maybanke and Edmund on the horse and carriage. And she became very friendly with her mother-in-law and corresponded with her for many years, but it seems as though the family was a bit of a, black sheep of the family. Edmund was. So he only lasted 2 years. And then by then, Norman was the chief engineer, and he was buying houses all over the Balmain Peninsula. So the family was settled in Balmain, and Edmund and Maybanke moved to Balmain. Unfortunately, Edmund turned out to be a drunk, possibly a philanderer, and after a while, financial support was sporadic. And he finally left her and the children over the course of 1884 and 1885. But she didn't divorce him until 1893, probably because it took so long to get acts allowing easier divorce and married women keeping their property. It took all that time for Parliament to pass those laws, because she didn't want him accumulating any income from her, because she'd now established a school called, let's see if I've got a picture of that. Yes, I have. Maybanke, strangely enough, Maybanke College in Marrickville. And she prepared girls for university entrance. She never had the opportunity to go to university herself. But there she is with a circle around her. You can see that she's quite slim, and the girls are outside. They're studying on the grass. So she was a very good teacher, and allowed lots of discussion among the girls, and they said it was a really happy time. So that's what she was doing. She always believed in education. Her 3 boys went to Newington, and they excelled. And she was also getting right into talking about suffrage. Let me see if I can. She recalled the first time that she spoke in support of women getting the vote. It was an ordeal. I had never spoken in public before, but I foresaw many years of struggle, much public speaking, and I determined to do it without notes, without breaking down, and then retire. We spoke at 2 or 3 meetings a week. We debated, and we were never lost a debate. I remember only one fight. It was in Newtown Town Hall, and only a few chairs were broken. if you've ever read Australian history at that time, and getting out the vote, and political campaigns, they were often held in pubs. And it could get really, really violent. But I'm sure they were much more demure than the men when you went to the pub. I don't think she went to the pub. So she believed in education. She didn't agree with the suffragette movement in England. She didn't believe in their direct action where they chained themselves to the railings of Parliament and a woman ran onto the racetrack and to protest and got killed by a horse. But the women's voice didn't sell very well. There are a lot of women that did not agree with women getting the vote. One of them was Ethel Turner, 7 Little Australians. Her husband was a judge, Judge Lewis. And she said, "It is horrid to see the way some of them go on about their rights and wrongs. It is old-fashioned to me, I suppose, but I do think it takes away from the womanliness of a woman to be in Parliament." So there you go. So they tried again and again to push to get the vote, to get support for the vote, and they were supported by a lot of men that were very powerful. A lot of the women who were prominent in the suffrage movement had husbands who supported them very strongly. They were members of Parliament, they were judges. Like one of them was Sir Alfred Deakin, Sir Alfred Stephen, Chief Justice of New South Wales from 1856 to 1894, so a long time. He was a relative of William Wilberforce, and just a minute, he was had a great sense of humour, and he wrote a poem during a boring bench session at Bathurst. Now, that part of me disapproves of that. He should have been listening to the court proceedings, but like Jan Roberts, I can't resist reading the poem. It's called Twice Nine, or Judicial Impartiality Exemplified. Of children this knight had no less than 18. He had 18 children. Twice 9 little heads with a marriage between 2 wives. He had 9 when a barrister, 9 when a judge, and of sex, thus to nature he owed not a grudge. 9 precisely were girls, the other half boys, an equal division between the quiet and the noise. While if by marriage the number be reckoned, there were 9 of the first and 9 of the second, 9 in Tasmania, 9 New South Wales. Then to show just with justice he had still held the scales. Since 9 it was clear he could not divide a third sex as yet, having never been tried. Well, I don't know whether that's still true. 5 sons and 4 daughters in Hobart were born. 4 sons, 5 daughters might Sydney adorn. Twin daughters, twin sons complete the strange story of this patron of Whigs, though a constant old Tory. He submitted the divorce bill to the Legislative Council 6 times before he retired when he was nearly 90. So I say it was great to have men like that on your side. So, so they kept campaigning for suffrage, and this is Women's Suffrage Journal. How do I interpret this as women being chained to the patriarchal society? You've got, who are they? Whiskey, drunkenness. What's the next one? What is it?
Seduction and gambling.
Yes, that's right. They were all the forces that were keeping women from achieving, and she's reaching out for the ballot. Of course, once women could have a say on the vote, they were going to be able to change things. So that they tried to sort of get the message across by argument and by those sorts of images. But newspapers like the Bulletin. The Bulletin was a very radical newspaper, but it was also racist, xenophobic, misogynist. And it said, in 1887, it published a long article called The Great Woman Question. Women, it said, were too conservative and are far from that stage of progressive rationalism when they can take their stand on the same platform with men. The equality argument is an absurd one. Women as a totality are far inferior to men as a totality. So there you go. And but they also hooked up with the movement towards federation, because South Australia, almost by accident, had given the vote to women. And they knew that once Australia was a single nation, if there was one state where women had the vote, all the women would have to have the vote. So sure enough, in 1901, we all got the vote, and it took England more than 20 years to get the vote. So this has, and in the confidence of the new nation, they made this banner showing young Australia appealing to Britannia, saying, trust the women, Australia, trust the women, mother country, as I have done, young Australia. So that kind of just showed that her tactics might have taken a long while, like federation took a long while, and maybe we should sort of, some of the things we would have liked to see happen that haven't happened might still take quite a few years. So anyway, I'll go back to children now, her work with children. I think that's next, yes. So this is the first free kindergarten in Woolloomooloo, 1896. She worked with the kindergarten throughout the rest of her life. It was a great struggle, as I said. There were a few philanthropists. I know it was the same with the Sydney Day Nursery Association. They got a lot of funding from one of the Reed family, who were into asbestos. And when I was looking at the archives, I found letters addressed from Asbestos House in Sydney. But I really don't think, well, she certainly didn't know about it. But Maybanke got very angry at the selfishness of rich people in Sydney. They were it was very hard to get them to open their purses for any good causes. So all the time she was working with the childcare centres, and they were starting to build them in all the little poor suburbs. Let's see. Oh, well, the next bad thing that happened to her was in 1895, her 23-year-old son, Arthur, was drowned when the ship on which he was a passenger was wrecked off Seal Rocks on the mid-north coast. So she only had 2 of the 7 children left. So there she is. The family stayed very close. And there she is there's Arthur on the left-hand side with his fiancée, because he was engaged at the time. And she was heartbroken. Maybank's in the middle with a circle around her. There's Mum, and there's little Ted, Edmund, little Ted, Ted they called him, he's the youngest, standing up, and Harry lying on the ground. So one of the other things that she advocated for, oh wait a minute, where do I do that? Oh, maybe later. Anyway, maybe I'll skip on to happier times, because she got married again in 1899. No, 1902. She married Francis, always called Francis Anderson, who was a professor of philosophy at Sydney University. He was 54 and she was 54 and he was 41. So they're odd match physically. She was tall, he was short. She had that lovely voice. He had a high, squeaky voice. But it was a marriage of true minds. Even though she had no university education, very little formal education. She was highly intelligent and he was brilliant. He had been a brilliant student at Glasgow University. And they were both concerned with the social justice, equally passionate about education. Teachers being paid properly, being more professionally trained, and they worked for what led to the founding of Sydney Teachers College in the University grounds in 1906. And the marriage seems to have been quite happy. They moved to Forest Lodge, which of course was a short walk for him to go to the university. And at weekends they went to a new place that they built at Bayview in Pittwater. It had a view of Scotland Island, and you can see Maybanke there. They seem to have been very happy there. They had lots of parties there. People would catch the ferry to Manly and then get a coach up past the Rock Lily Tavern, which used to be up there. And then they'd be met by a carriage from the house and they'd take them there, and he'd get students up there, he'd invite them to come. And so it was a very happy time of her life. And but one of the other causes she was working for was playgrounds. Children in densely populated urban areas had nowhere to play, and they saw playgrounds that had been set up in Europe because they travelled a lot, and they founded the Parks and Playgrounds movement. And I found a letter in the archive from Charles B, the war correspondent, supporting the idea of, because he liked the idea of people being healthy, so. But there were lots of other priorities after the First World War. Councils were reluctant to spend, and it wasn't until just before the Second World War that we started to get a few playgrounds, one of which was the Piedmont playground. Anyway, Frank got close to retirement, so they sold their Forest Lodge home in Maybanke. Wait a minute, this is one of the other things she did. Australian songs for Australian children. So she wanted people to be patriotic in a good way. That's that's a little side excursion. She was very. There was an epidemic of sexually transmitted diseases after the war, after the First World War, and women were very ignorant about sex, and so she wrote some little books called, what she called them? What do we tell the children? What do we, shall we confide in the girls? Shall we talk to the boys? And the best you could talk about sex in those times was by talking about flowers. And oh yes, you know, the flower gets pollinated, and, you know, it turns into a seed. Oh well, you know, it was better than nothing. And she hated the stigma against illegitimacy, because while rich women could and did use contraceptives, the poor couldn't. They had to have backyard abortions or illegitimate children that they often couldn't afford to keep. So she saw that women were driven into prostitution because of poverty, when most people in those times thought they were just bad women. That's why they were prostitutes. She maintained that nearly all crime resulted from poverty. And I love this sentence: all large fortunes are a result of roguery. Roguery. I like that word, roguery. She railed against child labour and the punishment of children whose only crime was that their parents had neglected them. And I'll just never forget when I was supervising students, when I was a lecturer at the college. I look back at some old diaries that they'd had to do in the pre-war period when the college was going, training teachers for childcare. And they'd been to look at visit a court to hear about what happened with children when they had to appear before the court. And she actually wrote in this book, this girl was being put into an orphanage because she'd been having an affair with her grandfather, which really sent a chill up my spine. So, anyway, she was sort of railing about the need for people to know more about how to avoid those diseases. Now, no, they didn't move to Lane Cove, sorry. She sold Forest Lodge, sold Maybanke, moved to Hunters Hill, to a house that they called the Haven. There were two French brothers called Joubert, stonemasons, who built many beautiful houses around Hunters Hill and Balmain. I lived at Hunters Hill when I was in high school, and that was before. There's a lot more building there now, but they're beautiful stone houses. And I was pretty sure I could work out where hers was, because I go back and visit my mother when my children were little, and I worked out where Maybanke's house was. It was right up on the slope going down towards the Fig Tree Bridge, looking down to the Fig Tree Bridge. And here's a description of the garden. They made a garden there. The home of Professor and Mrs. Anderson overlooks the beautiful wooded upper reaches of Lane Cove. Yes, no wonder you thought it was Lane Cove. Yes, it is the Lane Cove River, and the garden slopes down to the water's edge. Gardening is another hobby, and in 5 years she has brought the wilderness under her sway. The vegetable portion is the care of the professor, but the flower section is her care. There's also a palm garden. I look down over oranges, a giant sugar banana laden with green fruit, radiant camellias and a feathery jacaranda. The dappled sunlight flickers through the slats. They might have gilded the lily a bit, I think. Her 1925 engagement diary shows she didn't bring the wilderness under her sway. She was 80 by then. She had living domestic help, and the younger generations of the family regularly visited the Haven to see Auntie May and Uncle Frank. Maybanke's granddaughter remembers those outings. She loved seeing her grandmother, but Uncle Frank's homegrown vegetables, invariably presented at the end of a visit, always found to be bug-ridden, were also invariably thrown over the side of the ferry on the way I don't know if you've been to visits like that where you those things. Anyways, let's see. The final trip that they did, they had often travelled to Europe, but their last trip was delayed for quite a few years because of the first aftermath of the war. And finally, in, let's see, when was it? 1926, they took off, and they took with them a young neighbour named Josie White. She lived in Hunters Hill, and Maybanke had been very kind to her because she got very depressed after her mother died. So Josie went along with Maybanke and Frank as their chauffeur. So I'll just read you what was her final letter travelling in France. The 3 weeks between leaving the Riviera and arriving, they'd gone first to meet her new mother-in-law in Scotland, and then they came back. She wrote from the Hotel d'Escargot to her niece. An unfamiliar tone of ambivalence and uncertainty in this letter. She described the journey as very interesting and then said, I find the journey rather monotonous. Josephine is more than a daughter to both of us, and we couldn't do without her, but she drives always, and Mr. A sits beside her, and I in the seat behind are merely luggage when they are busy driving. And there's the first mention of ill health. She's fairly well. The late dinner was not good for me. I had 2 or 3 bilious attacks. I now have either nothing or a cup of milky coffee, and I'm not well. That was the last letter that she wrote. And she died in a clinic on Good Friday, April 1927. So this is the death certificate, if anyone can read the writing and read the French. My granddaughter, who's French, or lived in France for a while, we read it. It's really just identifying Maybanke. It says, daughter of so-and-so, wife of so-and-so, comes from Sydney, Australia, born in England. So clearly identifies her. Doesn't say cause of death. The death is confirmed by a doctor and then registered by a clerk of the council, or whatever it was. So you can imagine what the shock must have been. When they got news back in Sydney, last they heard, everything's going fine. Now she's dead. So Frank and Josephine continued their journey. They were joined by a chaperone, and it says in here, the relationship had been a source of gossip. So anyway, after their honeymoon, well, they got married the following January, Frank and Josie, and they took off for their honeymoon. They moved away to Wallara, and the Haven was sold. Harry died only 3 years after his mother. He was called the Birdman of Wahroonga, and his wife was a member of the Abbotsford School Council. So they left some good descendants, and, but it just seems an awful way for her to end her life. And as that professor said, she disappeared into the mists of history. So anyway, when Maybanke died in 1927, she'd been divorced for 34 years, and she'd been voting for 25 years. Her English sisters had neither unqualified right at the time that she died. So I hope you found her life interesting. I hope you found it worth remembering. And wait a minute, we've got something here at last about Maybanke and the connection that she had with here. The Maybanke Kindergarten was officially opened at Pyrmont on Thursday afternoon by the manager of the Colonial Sugar Refining Company, because as you know, CSR own most of the property around here. The name of the kindergarten has been changed from the Montessori Kindergarten to Maybanke in honour of Mrs. Maybanke Anderson, President of the First Committee. So just before, it's probably the last kindergarten that was built before she died, was the kindergarten in Pyrmont. So I think we should be very pleased and proud that we have these mementos and that remarkable woman here. So thanks very much for your attention. Oh, wait a minute, yeah, we've got a lovely picture today.
Oh, Leone, that was great.
Thank you so much. It was engaging, insightful, and it was really, we really enjoyed it.
So. Took a bit of organising.
You did take a bit of, but you did so well.
Thank you.
So we've got some time for questions. So is there any questions for Leone? Jan?
I was just wondering, was she buried in France, or did she?
Yes.
Okay.
They don't.
Oh, painful.
Sorry.
Should have all the questions.
They don't know where her grave is.
Somewhere in France, outside Paris.
So there's nowhere you can go. I think I was doing some more research in the last couple of days, and I found out that they put a little plaque up at Bayview, which is it's a very little one, and they had a photo in the local paper of their descendants. Oh. Am I not on?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
Yes, they've got a photo of some of the descendants, but they don't name them. I would have loved to have known who they were, who went up there. As I think I was saying to Carol, one of her grandnieces I worked with at Macquarie, and so she would be very familiar with all of this. And, they've been great contributors. Her nieces, her grandnieces. I think you said Ross Strong.
Yeah.
So, yeah, okay.
And they have that annual lecture on the 6th of
Yes,
May,
they do.
mainly about early childhood issues.
Yes, they still really promote the cause of early childhood education because it's still
And where is that
still
held?
lots of problems.
Where is that held on the 6th of May?
And where is it?
Is
it Jessie Street?
I don't know. But
We should advertise it. Yeah, I'll make it my business to track that down.
you might be the next speaker.
I couldn't add anything to what they know.
Sorry, if you're talking about the lectures, they're in Customs House, usually. The Maybanke Anderson lectures are held down in Customs House.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, right.
Once a year.
That'd be a good place to have.
They're fairly high powered.
Yes.
I think this year's one was a Sydney University professor talking about
Right, so
alcohol
it
issues.
might
with-
depend
yeah.
what's available.
You mentioned the plaque
Yes.
at Bayview.
Yes.
The house, is that still
Yes. Yes. I should have mentioned about the house because a great friend of ours lived at Bayview and we were at their place one day and his partner is a good friend of Jan Roberts, also wrote school histories, and she knew that I was interested in Maybanke and we were standing on the balcony and she said, "That's Maybanke's house." It was just below my friend's house and it's altered a bit of course, but it's still, that stone building is still there. Of course it's surrounded by heaps and heaps of other houses now, but it is still there. And so is the Haven in Hunters Hill. Yes. But there was another house also called the Haven, so in Hunters Hill, so it gets very confusing trying to track it down. But, yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how these things, coincidences.
Leone, could you just, when you did mention about, she had a lot of opposition from women,
Yes.
and women, and then there was you mentioned the issue about the British suffragettes,
Yes.
being more militant.
Yes.
Yeah, can you tell us a bit more about that debate between women about suffrage?
Oh.
And in a sense, did she get, how did she keep going? How did you not get despondent about that resistance?
There were very prominent women suffragettes in Australia at that time, and there was Louisa Lawson, who was a great advocate for votes for women, and Vida Goldstein, and a few other names. I didn't go into that too deeply because it spreads and spreads, but Vida Goldstein was better known in America than she was here for an advocate for women's suffrage. So they seem to have more influence in America than they did in England, though. England might have thought that the colonials didn't have much to teach them. Although I think, what was her name? What was her name? The Pankhurst, wasn't it? Emily Pankhurst. I think she might have come out here at one stage. So, but mainly it was Miles Franklin. So there wasn't a lot of opposition, more indifference, than opposition, as is often the case.
I know she opened a lot of kindergartens.
Yeah.
Are any of the others of them named after her? And what brought her to Pyrmont itself? She didn't live here or anything, did she?
What brought her to Pyrmont? They just thought they should build with them wherever they could, where the poor people were living. And Pyrmont was a very poor suburb in those days. And they sort of took over an earlier kindergarten that had been up New St Bartholomew's. So they might have named it after she died, I'm not sure. They might have called it Piedmont Kindergarten and then called it Maybanke.
There's a big population here though, with,
Yes.
with the doctor and the fire and something.
Yes, yes.
Children needed to go somewhere.
Well, they did, yes. Yes, which they still do.
Do, yes.
They're still very, you know,
Yeah.
Kate doing a great job. Yes.
And she had that very strong connection with the Sydney University. You know,
Yes.
when she died, they had that
Yes.
obituary in the Esther.
One more question, please.
I'm wondering if you could repeat the saying about wealth, the accumulation of wealth.
All great wealth is the result of roguery. Right on, yes.
Still very valid today, I think.
Even more so today. Okay.
Well, thank you again, Leone, and thank you everyone.